Had a busy day. It's approaching 5 p.m. Loads of unwell patients, loads of things left to do. You look up at the time and you're thinking, do I hand over and go home, or do I spend hours after I'm supposed to finish trying to sort all of these problems out? Well, today's video is why we think that's such a bad idea. All right, Ams, you know the scenario. You've been there. Handovers come in, loads of unwell patients, loads of things to do. Do you hand over, go home, or do you spend hours trying to figure it all out?
Yeah, so obviously experience, growth, going through foundation training and where we are now, the answers are flat. You hand over and you go home. So we do know that. Let's step into why we don't do that as an F1 doctor, right? So this is coming off of the back of a friend of ours telling us that they got home at 10:30 p.m. when they finished their shift at 5 p.m. And when we asked, why the hell haven't you handed over and gone home? The response often was, how can I hand over this? Complex patients. I know the ins and outs, and I've been discussing with so-and-so. So there's a lot of anxieties that we can pick up there, right? So thinking back to when we were in that position, I think I remember that vividly quite well, right? You've got this sick patient, they're septic, they've been using 8 all day, and you're worried because their blood pressure is dropping, they're spiking temperatures all over the place, and you're constantly worried, what if they deteriorate further and I'm not there? And I know them very well, right? I know that they're sensitive to only certain antibiotics, a certain renal consultant wants to be kept updated on their potassium count and calcium count or whatever. And it's very, It's very, you're full of fear handing it over. If they die, you feel like it's going to be your fault. You are the doctor responsible. What about you? How did you feel at 5 p.m. when you had that scenario?
So I think early on in your F1 journey, you feel like you are, in a way, the sole individual responsible for that patient, especially if you've had multiple discussions with multiple teams. There's still things left to do. And I think the mentality is you need to sort everything up. You have to tie all the loose ends and then you get to go home, right? And the problem is everyone always tends to stay behind. All the other juniors tend to stay behind, and that becomes the norm, right? Yeah. You'd very rarely see doctors, 5 o'clock, all right, hand over, time for me to go home, right? You're all there, you're all F1, you're all anxious and nervous. You don't want to do anything wrong. You feel you're the individual that's responsible for it and you want to tie it up before you go home.
So moving on to now handing over, right? So the first thing that we have to pick up on why you should hand over is, so I've got this big thing where you are not the sole doctor looking after the patient. You are a member of the team, and the team is not just you, your consultant, your registrar, it's the out of hours team as well. So you're all one body that's looking after the patient. I think our perspective is, as you said, it's me looking after the patient. It's me that's speaking to so-and-so consultant, so-and-so team, right? So talking about viewing the whole team as one, why is the phrase, oh, how can I hand over and burden the on-call doctor? Why is that wrong? Why is that perspective wrong?
So I think the main thing is to understand why a handover team exists, why there are on-call doctors, and maybe to normalize the process of it's all right to hand over unwell patients, right? The reason why there are on-call doctors are to do these jobs that are important, that affect immediate management for really unwell patients, right? So I think changing the perspective of understanding, all right, I'm due to work from X amount of time to X amount of time. And obviously the one thing we do have to say is unless there is an extreme emergency, unless there is something where you're there, life-threatening situation, right? But on the whole, we'll talk about what can be handed over, what can't be handed over, right? But the vast majority, I think, can be handed over.
So just
before we move on, do you want to talk about that? Yeah.
Let's talk about, just to clarify, we're not talking about handing over. Patients got clutching their chest saying, I've got chest pain. You finish at 5, so you're going to say, hold on, I'm going to call the on-call. That you do not hand over. Anyone who is sick, who is deteriorating then and there, you do not hand over. You need to stabilize that patient, get the appropriate call.
I think so. The best way you summarize it, and I was recently in this situation, is the only time where you should stay behind, the only time where there is a responsibility, patient safety, is when there is an unstable patient, right? Exactly. And there isn't someone immediately next to you that can take the baton and look after them. So that's the only time where we would say, okay, put handover to the side. There's an unwell patient, right? So the example was, we're about to leave work and someone's got frank hemoptysis. They're vomiting, they're coughing up blood, right? We're literally got our backpack on going to handover, right? Obviously, in that situation, there's no other doctors. You're going to have to sort it out, stabilize them, and then go handover, right? So putting those scenarios aside, it's...
Yeah, so those scenarios are that you have a duty to the patient. So you have a duty.
So let's do the rest of the video in the context of someone that's been unwell throughout the day, someone that you spoke to multiple teams during the day. However, they're now stable, yet you're still waiting for, let's say, a response from the neurosurgical team, right? Or you're still waiting for microbiology to get back to you, or you're still waiting for certain blood tests that need to be chased, which you took while the patient was unstable, right? Exactly. So I think that's a good example, right?
I think there's that example and there's the second one. So, for example, that upper GI bleed that you had, right? So if they're having the bleed there and then, obviously, you need to primary assessment, make sure they're stabilized. If you need IT or whoever involved, then you need to get them involved ASAP, and you need to do that. That's a duty you have, right? But I think there's the concept of that might have happened by 5 o'clock. You might have stabilized the patient by 6 o'clock, right? There are still people staying back until 10 p.m.
So let's say from that situation, exactly. So patient is stabilized, all the relevant teams are informed, but the blood tests ain't back yet.
That's what I mean.
Fine. Yeah. So in that situation, are you going to stay back until 7 or 8 o'clock for those tests to come back?
No. So I've stabilized. Yeah. So let's talk about this situation here. So if I'm out of hours, 5 p.m. and you've been in that scenario, and I'm in that scenario as well, the first thing I need to do is I've got a duty of care towards that patient. I don't care if I finish my shift. That patient's going to deteriorate without me right now, right? So I'm going to address it. But once I've done the primary assessment, done everything I need, taken the bloods, and the patient is stable, i.e. stable, they are not going to deteriorate, they're not going to die, their life is not under threat right now, or say their vitals have all at least normalized, they're going to need a scope for an upper GI bleed, and say the gastro consultant says, we can wait on this actually, we can wait on this, and we can do it tomorrow, keep an eye on the patient overnight. I'm not going to sit there and watch the patient overnight, right? It's it's the moment where we become a team. Now is the moment. After I've stabilized the patient, we become one, and then I find out who's the out of doctor, who's the out of hours doctor. All right, can I speak to you about this patient who I'm very concerned about? Okay, this is what happened at 5 p.m. This is what I've done. I've made my seniors aware, my registrar is aware, maybe even ITU are aware. ITU have said this, the gastro consultant said this, my medical consultant said this. These bloods need to be chased. I've done it. I've sent them off. I've already administered so and so and so. The nurses are aware. That can be handed over to the out of hours team. What did you do on that day?
So, real example, individual come in, long story short, towards handover, he's coughing up a lot of blood, right? So we stabilized him, gave him the blood products that he needed. We liaised with the teams that are responsible for it. At the end of the time, he had kind of a rupture of the pleural lining. He had probably some underlying malignancy, right? But that discussion was with a different hospital, different consultant out of our trust, right? So we stabilized him, we sorted him out, and then obviously I was there managing the individual with the reg. We went to handover and handed that over and said, literally, keep an eye on this patient. He's stabilized. All the relevant teams are informed. The only thing you need to be aware of is keep an eye out when that other team or other consultant comes back with certain further investigations, certain further management, right? I could have stayed, waited for that consultant who may or may not have even got back to me that evening, right? But that was the more or less the big thing that was handed over. And we left home. And the next day we came, he was stabilized, he was moved to a different ward, right? So the key thing here, from the example that the individual that said to us, was we had multiple discussions with other teams with a complex patient, right? So the key thing here is this is where documentation helps you, right? A good rule, a good practice is whenever you have these complex patients, complex discussions, you need to make sure you're documenting it. It might be a computer system, it might be on paper, but make sure you document the plan. What's the thing moving forward, right? A lot of the times doctors kind of just absorb it in their brain and they don't go around documenting it. So in a situation where you've had a discussion, you haven't documented it or saved it anywhere, or notified anyone, and you go home, no one's going to know, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So the best way for these situations, for that individual, he said, he had a lot of these discussions. It's all right to document it. And as an on-call doctor, if I get called to go see this patient, I can go through your notes and see the discussions that were had and the plan moving forward.
Exactly. So that's the purpose of a handover. So the purpose of the handover is whatever you think you've got up in here about the patient, whatever you've done, you're able to basically give all of that knowledge to the out-of-hours doctor so they can work as if it's you as well.
Essentially, right? You're continuing the care.
Exactly. And that's the point. It's a continuity of care overnight. So if I now go see that, say you hand it over to me, I should know what discussions have you had? Who did you discuss whatever you discussed with, right? What was their advice? What's their plan? Did they document any escalation plan? For example, is there DNA CPR in place, or are they for ITU? Is the ITU consultant already aware, or do I need to call them, right? If you've documented all of that, and you've, in fact, a one step better than that, I personally find, is that if you call me and tell me, because I'm able to sit there as the person who's going to be working on call and just ask you, did you ask this? Did you ask that? And if you say yes or no, I know what I need to do. And when you document, I think just to clarify on that, you need to document clearly all those little bits, not just the continue observation, monitor patient. It needs to be, I had discussion with so-and-so who advised so-and-so, this is the plan X, Y, and Z going forward. And then if deteriorates, please recontact, rediscuss, etc., etc.
I think, so all of those complex discussions need to be documented, right? And it literally is. And I think we need to realize that all doctors to a certain degree have a good level of training, right? And we should easily be able to pick up where you left off from, as long as the information is correct, as long as the information is there documented properly, right? So I think that's another reason why once a patient is stabilized, or once you've done the main stuff, you can leave on time, you can go handover, knowing and reassured that you've documented anything that's complex, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think, especially us, like me and you, we're not special. And with all due respect, F1s and SHs aren't special. The only people giving special advice and very specific, maybe super specialized knowledge is probably the consultants and the senior registrars, right? Otherwise, an upper GI bleed, it's on NICE website, it's on BMJ best practice, and it's the same across the country, right? The pathways are the same. But that person, for example, the gastro consultant might say, I can do the scope now, I'm going to do the scope now. He's special because you need him now. Right, but me and you can do exactly the same. We can prescribe the same, we can document the same, we can have the same discussions, and so on and so forth. So that's how we have to view each other as one body, and not I'm the special one looking after this patient. It's no, we're looking after the patient. So that's one aspect, right? So working as a team, as one body, what would you say is another reason why you should hand over and go home?
So the main reasons why we think, having done medicine for a few years now, why it's important to hand over and leave on time is, we as individuals, we need to look after ourselves. If you are staying behind hours on end every single day, you're not getting adequate rest. You're not getting the amount of downtime that you need to relax, to de-stress, get ready for a day at work. So that individual, he left and got home for, let's say, 10:30, 11 p.m. He needs to go home, he needs to chill, he needs to eat, relax, sleep, shower, whatever he wants to do. And then what? The next day, after a few hours sleep, he's back on the, the shop floor per se, right? So where's the rest in that for him, right? So your mental health, your well-being, what happened to work-life balance?
So, yeah, exactly. So that lack of switching off will take its toll eventually. And I've had a few discussions with a few new F1s, and they've said, genuinely being at work is just anxiety inducing. Right, you just want to get through the day, make sure everyone is alive, make sure the consultant plans go ahead, and just get through. And you don't want to be like that. Well, that's not enjoying work, right? To enjoy work, you have to. I think some of the factors that may allow you to enjoy work is A, feeling in control of your day, feeling your energy levels are well, and feeling like you get on with everyone and you're working as a team. You can ask for advice, feeling it's a safe place for you, right? So if you were looking after patients, if you knew that you've got a registrar, say, sitting in the office and a consultant sitting down the hallway, you feel safe. Why? Because if anything goes wrong, you can just say, hey, can you help me out? Or go to the consultant, right? You start feeling anxious when all of those things are taken away. One of the major things is rest, right? it's a lot on your cognitive load when you're sitting there doing the bloods, interpreting things, running up and down the hallways, chasing certain scans, actioning certain scans, communicating certain things across. It's not an easy job. We are trained to do it, but you're not trained to be going at 100 miles an hour 24/7. So you're right. You stop doing that. You go home at 10:30, at 11 p.m. You sleep for a couple of hours. You're back on the ward round. Where's your downtime? Where did you switch off? It will catch up with you. That's all I've got to say on that.
Definitely. And I think the best way someone described it is, unfortunately, it's one of those jobs, especially in the early few years of junior doctor training, is the more you give, the more it takes. You can stay behind and there will always be something for you to do. Really and truly, right? Absolutely. If you are the ward doctor for a particular ward, even if you're there for one patient, by nature, there will always be nurses coming up to you saying, can you prescribe this? Can you see this? Can you quickly review this patient since you're here, right? There will always be things to do. Why? Because patients need 24-hour care. We do continued care in this country, right? Yeah. So even if you stay for one person, you're going to end up doing other jobs for other tasks, right? And we've been there, right? You're like, let me just quickly do this. And you get into the habit of doing it and it becomes the norm, right?
Exactly. So on that front, right, this whole martyrdom thing. So we can't sit there as individuals, right, blindsided by the fact that, oh, I'm going to be a martyr and stay here and do this. Because what will happen is, you have to think, again, if you look at it as one body, right, are your colleagues going to thank you for when they have to do the same? Right? If you act as one body, as a team, right, you thank your colleagues when you're on call. And when say you're staying back and you're the on-call doctor staying till 10 p.m. or midnight or the next morning, right? You will thank your colleagues for them handing over to you at 5 p.m. and going home, because you can do that. You can get the rest when you're on ward duties and someone else is on call. So that's what a team does. A team does not say, I'm going to stay till 11 p.m. I'm also going to stay 11 p.m. when I'm on call, and I'm just never going to get any rest. Who's going to thank each other for that? And you have to ask, like, are these stressors, because people are staying late, are they contributing to this whole thing of incivility or whatever it is?
It might be, yeah. And I think the key thing, or the main reason we put this video out, is obviously a lot of people have come back to us saying, I end up staying behind at work many hours trying to sort these patients out. And the most common reasons are complex patients. Loads of discussions have been had. I know this patient well. There's a few jobs pending, right? And I think it's the reassurance of, as long as you do a good handover, as long as you documented all the discussions, all the things that need to happen, the escalation plans, who to contact, it is perfectly fine, and feel reassured that you can go home knowing that there is someone else that will be looking after that patient. And even if that patient does deteriorate or becomes acutely unwell, there is an on-call team whose job is specifically to look after these unwell patients out of hours. And I think, like you said, we shouldn't go down this martyrdom route where it feels like you are the individual solely responsible for them and you need to look after them because they happen to be on your ward.
Exactly. So moving on now, the other thing that you want to talk about is, so I saw this tweet just yesterday, right? That foundation training and being a doctor feels very lonely compared to medical school. So if you're in medical school, it's buzzing always. There's a 450 in our cohort. There's multiple different year groups. So if you think about it, there's like maybe 1,200 people floating around you. And suddenly you just go to a small unit, one F1, maybe two, an SHO, a couple of registrars, and maybe a couple of consultants, right? Where's the downtime? And if you're doing, as you said, going home at 11 p.m., waking up, coming back to work, you don't have that variety. You don't have that friendship and those relationships because you're at work all the time. You're at work when you don't need to be at work, when work isn't demanding actually you to be at work. Work has designed an on-call rota for you to get home, for you to go and unwind, meet your friends, hone those relationships. So I think you not handing over and going home when you can go home is basically sacrificing those relationships, those times that you can spend with friends and family and de-stress and relax and spend that hard-earned money.
And it's not just friends, though. Let's say our situation where you have a partner, you may even have children. So when do you get time to look after your kids or spend time with them, right? Obviously, they go early to school in the morning, they come home, they have early dinner, they go to sleep early night, right? So you may miss that window for many days at a time. So how awful is that feeling of like, do you know what? Like, I'm busy at work, I'm stressed, I'm coming home, I don't even get to spend time with my kids because obviously you don't want to interfere with their schedule and timetable. And then you're back again. So yeah, you're right. One reason why, again, you should leave on time, do a good handover, is it will take a toll and strain your relationships, and we've seen it happen.
Yeah. So just to summarize now here, so you handing over will do these things for you. You will learn to love your job. You will learn to have a life outside of work and just genuinely be happier with the circumstance and the environment you're in. So let's flip it on its head now. We talked about the negatives. Going home on time or doing what you're planned to do and going home means you're happier, you're well rested, better relationships, right? You can maybe work on your passion projects, right? And just generally you feel a lot more invigorated when you're at work. You get to focus more and enjoy the processes more because you know you're going home.
Right.
Exactly. Tiredness actually hurts.
Right. So let's say you've already been up since the morning. The level of decision making you're going to be making after 5, 6, 7, 8 o'clock is not going to be as sharp as it is once you're in the morning and had that fresh cup of coffee. Let's be honest, right? You do slow down. It's human nature. So if anything, it might be better to hand over and get a fresh set of eyes or get a different team or certain individual. But it's just to understand that there are systems put in place so you can leave on time. You can do a handover and not have to worry about unwell patients. So let's say several unwell patients, incompleted jobs. Right? A lot of the time it's like, we need to chase this blood or we need to get the results for this scan and act on it. Let's say patient comes in, had a fall, and it's collections due to be given at 6 o'clock, but you're waiting for the CT head. They've gone for the scan, they've had the scan done, but the report isn't back, and you're stressing because you need to make sure, do you give the therapeutic collection or do you hold it, right? In those situations, it's perfectly fine to hand over, explain the situations, explaining what needs to be done and what needs to be chased.
Exactly. And in that certain circumstance as well, in terms of giving VTE, right? Patient's not going to develop a clot because your medication is 20 minutes late, right? Or because you didn't sit there and as soon as the report came back, you didn't prescribe it, right? I think you can tell the on-call doctor, I've done the CT head, I've assessed the patient, we're just waiting for a report, so then we know, can we give VTE or not?
There is no way you are expected to stay until 6 p.m. to wait for that report to prescribe it.
Yeah, so essentially, handover means handover. You can hand over and go home. That's what the team is for. In terms of handing over, let's go through some tips on how you should hand over to the on-call doctor. What's the best way? So we've already done videos on what to hand over, and what not to hand over. We've got an article on Peerr about that. Like, for example, you handing over, let's say, chase a CRP, but do nothing, independent of if it's up or down. The patient is stable. They're on the best antibiotics. We're actually thinking of discharging the patient tomorrow. Why are you handing that over? I guess you can, if you really, in a sense, want it, you can say to the handover doctor, it's very low priority on your list. It's because it doesn't change management. The patient is doing well. But if you can, maybe you can glance at it. Maybe it's because you're twitchy, that CRP might be 300 and it's 0 today. I don't know if there is a chance of that. But if you're a bit twitchy. But I think making it clear to the on-call doctor, it's low priority because the management is not going to change. Or for example, you don't need to hand over everyone on your ward. That's why you have a nursing system, right? The nursing system will be doing the observations. They have been trained to flag people they're concerned about. But how do you hand over to a doctor?
So obviously there's many ways, loads of articles on Peerr, and we'll link them in the comments below. So obviously the famous one is the SBAR, right? The situation, the background, the assessment, the recommendation. The way I do it from personal experience, and everyone has their own way and style of doing it, is essentially, I have a patient, or it doesn't need to be patients, it can be jobs sometimes. I have certain jobs that need to be handed over. And the way I say is I give a brief description or summary of the patient. So, this is a 77-year-old man who came in, fever, unwell rigors, all of that stuff. We're currently treating him for X, Y, and Z. And then I will say the reason, right? So it's, we've done a scan. Can you chase the scan, chase the report, and act accordingly to it? Or it's, I've had a discussion with microbiology. They said to call them back in half an hour. They're busy. Do you mind having a discussion with them? This is the history. These are the antibiotics. Do we need to change it or continue it, right? Yeah. And it's essentially background of the individual, the patient, the job, what needs to be done, and the level of, I always like to give the level of urgency to it. And I think that's quite important. So I think a lot of times we just hand over a bunch of jobs, right? And then we just leave it with them, right? And they themselves don't know the level of urgency. Whereas I'm like, okay, these are 3 jobs, but I'll say out of these 3 jobs or these 3 patients, the one I'm most worried about is John, or the one that needs to be prioritized, and kind of as soon as you get the results, call XYZ. I'll give a level of urgency as well.
Yeah, I think just to add to the discussions now, right? With all discussions, even for doctors who are doing it as part of their day job, when you call someone, know the question that you're asking. Exactly. So I hate or documenting things like discuss with microbiology consultant, discuss with renal consultant. Discuss what? What are you discussing for? For example, discuss with the endocrine consultant about management of sodium in the context of CKD4. Now you know what you're asking for, right? So you know I need to ask what fluids, what rate, I need to ask how to give it, all of that jazz. So when you discuss with a consultant or you ask someone to discuss, let them know what's the question that you want to answer. Because that makes life easy. Otherwise it's like, so I've got a patient who's got this context, discuss with renal consultant, discuss with microbiology what? The question might be for microbiology, what's the most appropriate antibiotic? Or maybe sensitivities, you can't see it on the system, but they've got it. So the question might be, do you have sensitivities? Or patient might be on, I don't know, tazocin or something, not responding still. You might say to the microbiology consultant, is there an antibiotic I can escalate to? These are hard questions that have an end point. So that's one way. You've said the S-bar system. Talking about urgency, what needs to be done now, later, can be done at the bottom of your priority, like that CRP example I gave you. Anything else that you can think of?
So the other thing I do, and I don't know if it's appropriate or if there's a rule about it, is not only do I hand over to the on-call doctor, I always inform the nurse looking after the patient. And what I've noticed is, let's say I'm leaving the shift, it's been busy, there's unwell patients. I always say to the nurse, all right, nurse, I'm going to hand over XYZ jobs that needs to be done for this patient. Do you mind checking on it? Or do you mind, if you get a time, to remind the on-call doctor that, oh, hey, do you know what? You are supposed to come and review this patient and prescribe this, or you're supposed to check the result of this scan. Can you inform me what it is so I can move forward, right? So I think not only is it a good practice to inform the doctors, but we should also inform the nurses looking after them, because they also need to know what's happening. And most often than not, nurses, the shifts are always longer than the doctors. So you will most likely finish before they finish.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, viewing the whole MDT team again as one team, one body. So that's actually a crucial tip. So the nurses are looking after, say, a small group of patients, right? Might be 5 or 6 patients, right? Especially after the ward round, they need to know what's the day plan for them. Are you giving antibiotics? Are you going to be starting them on, say, CPAP or something like that? They need to know so they can prepare their sort of schedule and what they're going to do as well. And even like at handover time, you telling the patient, for example, telling the nurse, I'm concerned about this patient as they've not been amazing all day. Can you keep an eye on them? If you notice their blood pressure drops, their heart rate goes up, just make it clear. Please call the on-call doctor.
I think that's it. I think the best way is informing both sides, both teams, because let's face it, when you are on-call doctor, you are busy. And you may be handing over one unwell patient, but there may be another 5 other doctors handing over just as well unwell patients, right? And it's nice to sometimes get a nurse calling you and prompting you like, hey, we were told to give you a call if the news goes up, or, you know, if the systolic drops to a certain number, and then they might, oh, cool, do you know what? I know the history, I'm going to come review them, right? Because you're busy as well. So I think it's, like you said, understanding that we are one team, we are looking after patients, and it's not our sole responsibility. Plus, you have to remember, there are regs and consultants as well that can pick up, right? So I don't know if you want to mention about that.
So I think as an F1, I felt this too. And I said at the beginning of this video, you feel you are the sole doctor. You feel that if you're not competent, if you can't do it, then that's it. It's the end of the world. But we forget that, hold on a minute, there's a registrar who has years and years of experience. There's a consultant who's got decades of experience. Or at the end of a telephone, I can sure get through to someone who's got the answers that I just can't find right now, right? So I think when we forget that, and when we're open to asking for help, when we understand it's not me alone, right? it makes life easy. Like I remember as an F1, I literally asked, what fluids do I give at what rate? Now you could say, what? You asked that as an F1 doctor, you must be absolute. No, it's just that I didn't understand it at the time. So for example, if you got a patient whose blood pressure is crashing, it's going down, they're not responding to your fluids, the question doesn't become anymore, how much volume can they fill up with? They just don't have any, vascular motor tone anymore, right? So do ITU need to get involved? You asking those questions can be life-saving, because the ITU consultant or reg might turn around and say, you know what, this patient might need metraminol or something like that.
And the second thing as well is, regs do reg to reg handover as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So for that patient, while I handed over to a junior doctor, my reg went and handed over to a reg on call as well.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So you have to always think, oh, do you know what? I'm the only person handing over. If I mess it up, we're in trouble, right? Sometimes, and most often than not, you will inform your reg. If it's an unwell patient, the reg is always going to be involved in some capacity, and the consultant will know about it, right? So that's a prime example. He's like, you hand over to the on-call doctor. These are the jobs for the on-call doctors. And then the reg will hand over to the reg. Like, okay, cool. Do you know what? We need a senior review, right? Exactly. So don't feel that you're the only individual giving a handover. If a patient is that unwell and that acutely sick that they need multiple inputs from a senior level, I have confidence that your reg will go and hand over to the reg. Obviously, sometimes there's reg covering the ward, some on the take. Be like, okay, heads up. This is an unwell patient. The junior's going to be doing X, Y, and Z. Go and review them. So there are, other things that to protect you.
And I think being in a more senior position, right, you want to know if someone is sick as well. If there's a patient who's an F1 is looking after, and maybe they've got a few questions in mind or they're struggling with a few things, I want to know so I can help, because that patient is under our care, not just your care or his care. We're a team again. So we want to work together, right? And the registrars, for sure, for 1,000,000%, want to know who's sick so they can get involved. And then, of course, the registrars will then make even a consultant aware if they've got a really, say, like surgery, for example. If it's very, very complex and the registrar needs a hand, they'll call their consultant in. Exactly. So it's one team always. I guess that's the main thing that we've been banging on about this whole video. Any last remarks to say before we end the video?
I think it's important staying behind after work. In the beginning, it's fine. It's normal. You think it's the way to go about it. You don't bother too much about it. But if you make it a habit, if it becomes a norm, then it does catch up on you, and then it does have detrimental effects. So definitely something not to be taken lightly, for sure.
Exactly. So there you have it. If you're staying back behind, you need to stop. Let's start working as a team. Go home, enjoy yourself so you can enjoy work too. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.